I am moving to an NBA city, and I'll tell you which one in a second, but right now, there are more important things to get to. Hey, I'm Casey Kiernan. You know, the most messed up thing about Chris Webber's basketball career is not calling the timeout when they had none left that cost Michigan the national championship. It's that for everything he did after that, the first thing people think about is the timeout when he was in college. Well, he's never really talked about that moment in depth since that day in the early 90s. But now that he's entering the Hall of Fame, the number one pick has to discuss it. For years, he hid from his worst moment. He was the only member of the Fab Five not to participate in the documentary. Now, he is finally owning up to what happened that day. And the reason it's such a big deal is because the Fab Five, Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, Juwan Howard, Jimmy King, Ray Jackson, are still the greatest recruiting class ever. They were the first all-freshman starting five in a national championship game, but people hated them. Back in the early 90s, teams did not look like this. Bald heads, baggy shorts, tattoos. I mean, that stuff is normal today, but back then they were the first. People called them thugs and other names. They said they were bad for basketball. It turns out they were just young and having fun, which was also a problem apparently. No freshman had ever been that successful. 4 out of 5 went on to sign NBA contracts. So when a bunch of 18-year-olds made the championship game, everything changed. Nowadays, it's normal for that to happen. Shortly after them, kids just went from high school to the pros. But back then, expectations on them were huge. Chris Webber wasn't just the best on that team. He was one of the best in school history. As a freshman, he dropped like 16 points a night. They lost to Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, and Duke in the title game. In his second year, he upped that to 19 points a game, going back to the championship. They were down 3 at their final timeout. Chris scores then to cut the lead to 1 point. UNC makes 1 free throw to lead by 2. Webber gets the rebound. And that's when everything unravels. Not only did he travel, which wasn't called, he then called a timeout when he was trapped in the corner, but they didn't have one. So it was a technical foul, 2 shots, and possession for the other team. To this day, Chris Webber is blamed for a mistake that cost them a chip. He went on to be the number 1 pick, have a Hall of Fame career, but so many people still talk about the timeout. One of the only times Chris actually talked about it on camera was right after the game.
I called the timeout. That was, whatever I did, that's what was going through my head. And it probably cost our team the game.
Now, he has talked about the timeout since then, but normally it's online in an article or in a paper, not on camera. Until now, because now he's being inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Chris is forced to basically relive his entire career, which is awkward for him. I mean, he even said, I've just never been the type to straighten out rumors or the word on the street or urban legends, things like that. I learned at a young age, probably around 14, that if I was gonna worry about that, I would be dead a long time ago. So I try to concentrate on today, tomorrow. In other words, not on the past. Now, before we actually get to his on-camera quote about the past, there's one guy who's all about the past, and that's Jalen Rose. He and Chris Webber were the only 2 Fab Five players from Michigan. They were ranked number 1 and number 2 in high school in their state. They were tight in college, but in the league, a huge scandal broke out when it was discovered that a booster gave illegal payments to a group of Michigan players, including Jalen and Chris. Now, Rose admitted to what happened to the FBI. Webber, though, lied about it and slandered the man who gave them money. He said he preyed on kids' innocence to cash out once they turned pro. Now, eventually, Webber was forced to confess in a plea agreement, but Rose thought that his old friend was out of line for lying and talking bad about the man who loaned them cash. He demanded that Webber apologize. He went on TV talking about Chris. He even broke down the timeout play on national TV. All this was behind Webber's back, and he said Jalen Rose sold out their friendship to become a TV star.
We don't really have a relationship. You know, I've never talked about anything with the Fab Five or anything. And so when he broke that code, you know, to what I feel further his career, that hurt me as a man.
Yeah.
You know, because they don't love us.
Yeah.
That's how we built the Fab Five. They don't love us. So to give them what they want and become one of them now when you can always be yourself and hold your integrity, that really hurt me.
And that is, to this day, basically where the relationship stands. Yeah, they had a moment on ESPN recently where Jalen interviewed Chris about being in the Hall of Fame, but that was a moment for TV. They still haven't gone behind closed doors and hashed things out. However, they might do that now because Webber is in the Hall of Fame. All the old days are being hashed out. And finally, Chris Webber said this about the moment that will unfortunately define him for a lot of people.
You go back to that moment. What was that like? And how did you hit the button in the moment to say, okay, I got to keep going?
One of the most proudest moments I am of myself is being on that podium and not blaming anyone and looking my father back in the eyes. All the people that I had hurt or let down or had their wishes on me, you know, they gave me my soul back, baby. Detroit, Michigan. I mean, it was a long, hard journey, but most people have to do that in their life. At one point, I just had to do it before I had a driver's license.
So
I hope that now he's actually talked about the timeout that openly, people will move on and look at the rest of his career. This dude's in the Hall of Fame despite never winning a title because his impact was huge. He redefined the power forward position to what it is today. He idolized Magic Johnson growing up, so even as a big man, he learned to handle the ball, shoot, and pass. His first coach, Donnie Nelson, tried to make Chris Webber an old school center, posting up all the time, but of course Chris hated that. Despite winning Rookie of the Year, the Warriors traded him. And after a few years in DC, he became a legit superstar in Sacramento. In 2001, 27 points a night with 11 boards, 4 assists with good efficiency. He made 5 All-Star teams, 5 All-NBAs, but even that team wasn't all about him. Those Kings passed the ball like we see today, when everyone else back then was still playing 90s isolation ball. Eventually, injuries took Chris down, but in a really short prime, he was as good as any all-time great in his era. I am so glad that he's being this open about the worst days of his career so that people can stop focusing on that and give him props for the amazing part of his game. And if you came out of this story not really liking Jalen Rose all that much, you know what? I agree with you. Because on top of that, there's a little-known story about how he almost ruined Kobe Bryant's career. Seriously.